So in our previous videos, we looked at how to put an image onto a web page, and we learned about the alt attribute and the title attribute, which are highly recommended, and of course the source attribute, which is required. But now I want to look at how can we style the image. And you might say, well, it's an image. Isn't it already the style that it needs to be? And the answer is mostly yes, that is correct. However, there are some things that we can still control with CSS. And so we're going to look at things like sizing and position real quickly. So if we look at the web page, we can see our image here. But our text doesn't go around it. A lot of times we want to put our text around that image. I'm going to show you a couple things that I like to do just real simply. I'm going to come to my CSS, and what I want to do is I want to take the image and put it on the right-hand side of my screen. So I'm going to create a new class called .right. And this is just going to be a nice, helpful name for me to know what I'm doing. I'm going to use the float property, and I'm going to say I want to float to the right. In my HTML, I'm going to come right here and add a class that is the right class. Reload my page, and you notice that now my image is on my far right hand side and the text is all the way around it. I could of course also create a class called left and have it float to the left side. Let me just demonstrate that real quick for you. In this case, in my HTML first, I'm going to specify left. And then in my CSS, I'm going to specify .left. And my float property will be to the left. Reload my page, and you'll see that moves over. Now, one thing I do want to point out, and I like to caution against, is if you notice the text is right up against that image. And whether you saw or not, it was the exact same way on the right-hand side. Now, because our text is left justified, the words may not end right up against that image. But because it is left justified and floating to the left, they all do. So a quick modification will fix this. And if I'm going to be floating to the left, I like to put a margin on the right-hand side of my image. And we'll just use 10 pixels. Of course, if on my right-hand side, I'm going to put a margin left. And once again, I'll do 10 pixels for it as well. That way I ensure I have a little buffer space. It keeps the text from being right on top of that image and being hard to see. When I reload this, notice that it instantly just gives a little bit of spacing and makes it a lot easier for me to read. That's how I can move my text around my image, and the float property does that. The float takes us out of our normal left to right, up, down type of rendering, and instead wraps text and other elements around that element. And it doesn't have to be an image, but images are where we typically see that. So this is a great example of that. Of course, I can do other things with my image as far as sizing. So let me give you another perfect example. So if I want to have a smaller size image, I could create a thumbnail. What I could do is say something like max width is 150 pixels, and maybe max height is 150 pixels as well. To apply a second class to a tag, I'm going to put a space after my left and add thumbnail. Now when I reload, notice that my image is much smaller. Now, one thing I do have to caution you about with this is that while we did say the max width and max height would be 150, so what that does is it makes the max width and the max height 150 pixels. That allows us to stay proportional, so if it's not square, it will figure out what the max is and proportionally resize the other side. But there is a downside to this, and that is we've resized it in the browser, but the file size is still big. So that could cause an issue with download speeds. And I've seen cases where we've had really, really large images that were shown really, really small. You downloaded all this and then displayed it as this big. And that obviously wastes a lot of bandwidth. It makes it slower for your web page. You can have bandwidth issues and overages on your website. None of those are good. So a quick and easy solution to that is to save it as a different file and keep it smaller. Inside my images folder, you'll notice that I have a blue bucket and a blue bucket thumbnail image. And those are two separate images that are much different in size. You might say, well, how different is it? Well, my blue bucket JPEG is 24 kilobytes. The thumbnail is 18. You might go, is that really a big difference? Yeah, it is. 6 kilobytes does add up over the time. And if you had a very large file, it could cause some big issues. I've seen cases where you have multiple megabyte size files and it's being used as a thumbnail that could have been 20, 30K, maybe less. So if you can, resize the file directly and then do final tweaks with your CSS if necessary. Now, I also had a much bigger file that you might have saw called background. I'm going to show you a background in a few minutes on a different thing, but I do want to show you real quick what that image is going to look like and what it's going to do. So I'm going to create a new image tag here. Source, images, and background. I'm not going to bother to put an alt attribute for this case because it's just a graphical perspective. I'm going to come in here and reload and notice that this image is, well, huge. Okay, you'll notice that it's scrolling out past the size of my main. It's large in here, and this is going to cause some issues. We want to fix this. Okay, so the easy way to fix this, real easy way to fix this, of course, is to go and resize the image in an image editing tool. If you don't have access to something like that, what I'd recommend is coming in and creating this tag. And I always have this selector in my CSS. I specify image, and I say max width is 100%. And what that means is it's going to look at the containing element, and it's going to make sure that my image is never bigger than 100%. I can also say height is auto. That's going to make sure it stays proportionally. It's not as necessary in modern browsers as some older ones, but you can still put it in there. Now when I reload, remember that only this little corner was originally showing. Now it shows the whole image. And you might think, well, wow, that's a really great background style image. And yeah, it can be, but we can do some other things with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we can style and use background images and how we can style our images to make them look a little bit stronger in the next set of videos.